This episode of the Cascadian Beer Podcast has been made possible by the BC Ale Trail. Arrive thirsty, leave inspired at thebcaletrail.ca. Welcome to the Cascadian Beer Podcast. My name's Aaron and I'm a Cascadian. In this podcast series, I profile the unique breweries of Cascadia, a region that has a strong presence on the international beer scene. Cascadia is a bioregion in the Pacific Northwest on the North American continent. It's made up of the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the Canadian province of British Columbia. If this is your first time here listening to this podcast, welcome. I sure hope you hit subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Then that way, you'll never miss an episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please feel free to share it with your friends. It really helps support this podcast series. A region that has seen some major development in recent years is Kelowna, British Columbia. Located in the Okanagan Valley, Kelowna has seen growth in not only the craft beer community in recent years, but also vineyards, tourism, and technology. A newcomer onto the scene, and who just celebrated their first year opening, are Vice and Virtue Brewing.
My name is Matt Jewell. I'm the general manager at Vice and Virtue Brewing in Kelowna.
And my name is James Windsor, and I am the brewmaster here at Vice and Virtue.
All right. So, Vice and Virtue in Kelowna. It is hot out there today when we're taping this. But where exactly are we in the Kelowna area here for somebody who hasn't really been here before?
So we're in the north end of Kelowna. So we're just north of downtown in the light industrial area, halfway between downtown and Knox Mountain Regional Park.
And how long have you been open for?
Since July last year. So we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary.
Cool. What's the date on that?
Good question.
July 6th, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, something like that.
It's kind of a blur, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the long weekend. It was the week after.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So my favorite question to ask, and it goes to both of you, how did beer find you?
You can go first on that one if you like.
How did beer find me?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, through my heritage, beer is a big part of the culture that I grew up in.
Do you want me to tell you my terribly awful Australian beer joke?
You may as well.
I would like to hear it.
Okay. Why do Queenslanders have 4X on their beer?
No idea.
I've no
Because
idea.
they can't spell beer.
Boom, boom.
Pretty good.
Being from Victoria, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, Melbourne's my favorite spot, so...
Yeah, so I'd say, it's pretty much like I always remember being a kid, being around sports clubs, being around like pubs, growing up in small country towns where the pub was like the hub of the community and the sports club and stuff like that. And then in my later years, you know, as I traveled a little bit and started exploring a little bit through like wine and then sort of getting into craft beer, did some trips through the Pacific Northwest down to Oregon, Washington, and so on and so forth.
The beautiful Cascadia.
Yeah, man. That's what it really, really hit me that I wanted to, at that point I'd been in Kelowna for a while and I wanted to come back and do something here. Mm-hmm. So I started home brewing and got a group of friends together and then, we decided it was time to open our little brewery here in the North End. So
Did you get a Cooper's kit as your homebrew kit as your first one?
No, funny enough, actually, one of our really good mates is got a little brewery down in Melbourne and he was working here as a winemaker. So we were like watching him doing some homebrew and getting involved and drinking his homebrew. And then he actually left to start his brewery and his homebrew kit was sitting around. So we decided to fire it up in my little shed in my backyard. And that's kind of where we went. We went full grain from the beginning. I built a little full herms like mash tun with recirculating, and then we're just fermenting in my basement. Just kicked on from there.
I'm trying to think of my earliest beer memory. Probably goes back to going to the LCBO with my father as a child. And he would take an exuberant amount of time picking through the various imported versions of lagers.
Right.
He was pretty picky about them, but I think they're all slowly getting purchased by AB InBev and turned into mass-produced lagers. And I started collecting beer coasters sometime around, I was like 12, I think. I started drinking beer probably shortly after that and started falling in love with English pub beer. like the early nitro cans of like Guinness and Boddingtons and Kilkenny and things like that. And then just kind of always was just drinking every different type of beer style I could find. But didn't think about turning it into a sort of a passion or career until I worked a vintage making wine. My brother was a winemaker down in, I guess at the time it was a Soyuz. Did that. I'm like, hey, making alcohol seems like a pretty good gig. And I was sick of the job I was working at the time. I started homebrewing shortly thereafter and just totally fell in love with it. And then went to beer school and then have been working in the industry ever since.
So then how did you two find each other then?
It's a pretty funny story, actually.
Right.
So, said brother of James got word through some of my business partners who are in the wine industry that we were starting this project. And he talked to my business partner, Dave, from Tantalus. And he said, hey, man, are you looking for a brewer by chance? And at that point, we would kind of like realizing that the leap from the shed on the 5-gallon system to the 10-barrel production thing might have been a little bit out of our reach. Now,
A little ambitious.
a little ambitious. And our buddy who was our winemaker buddy who left here, he was sort of helping us consult, and he advised us to get a professional brewer. Pretty serendipitously, my other business partner, Matty Wenzel, was driving into Toronto at the time, and I called him about this guy and gave him his number. And Matty called me back about 15 minutes later, said, I'm going to meet the guy in an hour. He called me back about 3 hours later and said, he's the guy.
Yeah, pretty lucky. At the time,
Didn't even taste beer from him. You're just
Yeah,
Matt did.
my business partner.
Okay.
My business partner isn't Matt. He's fairly well known in the wine industry here, and he's a sommelier, and he's the guy who really like got us going in the shed and really whipped the enthusiasm into shape. So he was the right guy to taste the beer while he was there. So.
sweet.
Yeah, it was pretty lucky timing. The project I was working on hadn't sort of come into fruition. My partner at the time was pregnant, and she's from BC. So I always promised her when we started a family, we would move out west. Mm-hmm. And so my brother is like, hey, these really group of stand-up dudes are starting a craft brewery out here. You should probably take the job or at least apply for it, see what it's about. So I talked to them all via Skype and obviously met Matt over at Verse Sausage House in Toronto, and he seemed like a great dude, and we seemed to share our same concept of what we think beer should be. And then these guys offered me the job, so I packed up my life and drove across the country in the middle of January.
Best time of year.
And yeah, thankfully didn't die.
Yeah.
In a rear-wheel drive.
With a newborn or a pregnant wife?
Pregnant wife.
Right.
Pregnant
Okay.
wife
So
at the
that-
time and a dog. So yeah, I just packed up everything and moved out to BC. Okay. And then we started breaking ground on this place in March. Mm-hmm. And the rest is history.
All right. So that was my next question then. Like, we're coming up to a year at the time of taping. So like, what was that lead time then from breaking ground and then?
Well, actually, yeah. Like, so the project's like been in our minds. Like, we've been like chattering about it for a few years. We're involved in the Homebrewers Club here. It's a really strong Homebrewers Club here in the Okanagan. OK Brewers. So I got to meet a lot of really cool dudes for that.
Okay.
And so just got to meet a lot of industry folk through that. And yeah, the concept was going for a couple of years. We were brewing, and then we decided, we could see what was kind of what we say was coming over the mountain from Vancouver with you could see the amount of tap handles that were changing over in town. People's interest was spiking. B&A had fired up, and they were really kicking goals. Kettle River was like already ready to open up. Tree Institute was up and running, which is the old Dave, the old brewer from Tree Brewing here, and we could see it coming. So we jumped on the project. Finally got to break ground. It was actually February 12th when we broke ground on this little 2,000 square foot place. It's the first day that we sawed some holes in the floor, and we kicked the doors open on July 6th-ish, something along those lines. So it was a pretty quick build.
Yeah, that's a very quick
super impressive. Someone who's been a part of numerous brewery build-outs, this was the fastest and most efficient. I was blown away when they told me we're going to be open in June or July. I'm like, probably next year, but I didn't say anything at the time.
June and July 2020.
Yeah, and then lo and behold, they just sort of blew through it. And credit to these guys for putting the work in to get it done.
Hey, man, you were here as well.
Yeah, I was there too.
I'm putting that paneling up on that sea can.
Yeah, not my strong suit, but I did the best I could.
But you also had a brew house to build, right? So like, what's the size of the system and all that you got in there?
Yeah, well, a 10-barrel system that we luckily got from our good neighbors at Cellar Tech here, but I'm sure Matt can tell you about that relationship.
Yeah, well,
It involves his wife.
yeah. Well, actually, the good thing is like this brewery's in part of the Celatec building. My wife works for Celatec. They're a brewery, winery, and cider and distillery supplier. This actual warehouse that we're in,
a good partner to have.
Yeah, very good partners. Really good support. I knew this space was sitting here is actually full of wine bottles that my wife couldn't sell at the time.
Right.
Funny enough. So had a bit of a chat with Pete and Perry, who own the place, and sort of got talking about the plan, and they kind of gave us like really good handshake deal on the lease. And then, as a reciprocating kind of relationship, we bought all the equipment off them. So, it worked out pretty good, man. So we ended up getting, the two vessel, 10-barrel system and the 6 unis in here, single vessels. Which we've actually just signed off on this week to actually upgrade to 2 double fermenters. So it's a big moment for us. Not even year one, and we're already upgrading a bit. So it's pretty cool. So, yeah.
Right. I'm in conversation with Vice and Virtue. Kelowna is a booming craft beer region of the province, and the best way to discover what else you can find is by visiting the bcaletrail.ca. The BC Ale Trail showcases many parts of the province, and on the website you'll find recommended itineraries for each region, a comprehensive list of every craft brewery in BC, a calendar with beer events, and a blog with lots of great stories. The regional ale trails include local breweries, pubs, and restaurants, along with other activities the area has to offer. So whether you're planning a weekend trip or being a tourist in your own backyard, let the BC Ale Trail guide you to your next beer adventure. Arrive thirsty, leave inspired at bcaletrail.ca. All right, let's jump back into my conversation with Vice and Virtue. Cool. And then what was the whole focus of the styles of beer that you wanted to approach? Because, we're sipping on some now, and they're very lovely, but they are not your typical run-of-the-mill beers, I'd say.
Right. Well, I'd say, I guess when we very first set out, we wanted to keep everything fairly simple. That was before we, knew we were going to, hire a professional brewer. So, we started out beers that were approachable, beers that we liked as well. So we started off with a Pilsner, a Pale Ale, a New England style IPA, and then that red beer that you're drinking there, which has sort of quickly became our signature beer, Raspberry Berliner Weiss. The reason behind that beer was my one of my business partners was in Aussie, and he'd seen a beer similar to that, and he's like, "We got to make that beer." And I'm like, "Are you crazy selling a red beer in Kelowna, man?" And he's like, "Trust me, I know booze, man. People will crush it." And so we went for it, and luckily we had that idea in place. We didn't really have the technique in place, but luckily James came in at the right time, showed us how to do it, and pretty much knocked her out of the park first batch, and away we went.
So is it your number one selling beer? Or
Yeah. They all sell very well. It's just it seems to have that kind of, it's the beer that kind of like, I guess, stood us out straight away in the market.
Well, it's a completely different color than everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then what have been some fun projects that you've brought in terms of beer style?
The great thing about working here is they've given me quite a bit of leeway to experiment. When I first got the job, they obviously were like, well, we need these 4 beers. And then after that, whatever you can sort of come up with. So it's been great. I've been sort of experimenting with a lot of new hop varietals and fruit as well. Obviously, we've been smashing out quite a few fruit beers, which is sort of the big draw for me to come to the Okanagan in the first place. Was
no shortage of fruit.
The accessibility to local fruit as well as access to wine barrels. To me, it seemed like probably one of the best places in Canada to make beer. Here in Prince Edward County, I would say would be the 2 spots. Been doing all kinds of crazy things.
Well, you mentioned wine barrels. Have you done anything with wine barrels?
Well, we did 2 projects with Dave from Tantalus, one of the owners, and the first one we did was a Riesling Kolsch, which I quite enjoyed. So we used some of his old vine Riesling grapes and just let them ferment with a basic German Riesling Kolsch, and it turned out quite popular. It was pretty interesting that we ended up doing 2 batches. The second batch was a little bit funkier because the grapes had been sticking around. Different character that was quite enjoyable. And then the second one we did was a Syrah Saison. So we used some late harvest Syrah grapes and put them in with a sort of a new age saison, and it worked out pretty well. You got some of that spice character. The idea of trying to replicate some of the flavor profile of a Syrah, but in a easier drinkable, lower alcohol beer. And I liked it quite a bit. Some people have said they've enjoyed it too, but it's,
yeah, I think I like. I've liked it.
Yeah, it was mediocre.
No, absolutely not. I've enjoyed all the beers. I would say that I think that those grapes were slated for ice wine grapes, and the freeze didn't really come this year in time for ice wine.
Right.
So it was late harvest. So we're kind of hoping that this year we get the freeze a bit earlier, so we can get those. Get that nice, fresh snap.
But I mean,
frozen.
It wasn't bad.
Oh no, absolutely. No. But like when you sit here every day drinking beer and tasting through things, and tasting it as it ages, you're always trying to like push and sort of see what we could do next. So.
Right.
So yeah, it's nice for them to sort of give me the leeway to just be like, well, here's a beer I've never made before, and let's hope it works. And you only get one chance a year to do it because grapes only come around once. So it's going to take a few years to perfect it, I think. But so far we're on the right step.
Well, and then like you're really at the force of nature at the point, they don't freeze correctly. They don't.
In this case, it was actually our benefit because the winery couldn't use it, so we
exactly
swooped in there and
try sleeping before the deers and the birds got in there too deep.
Exactly.
So.
Right. So going back to the opening, how was that opening week? Like, what was the response from the community like?
Amazing, man. Like this has it's like mind blowing, really. Like when you come essentially you come out of the shed and then you're deep into like the organizing phase, and there's a lot to do to open a brewery. You don't just say open a brewery and then and then it just happens. Clap your hands happen. It's a lot of work. Luckily, I got a really amazing team of investors around me and business partners who are all still hands on to this day. Actually, lots of them they're getting involved right now and trying to organize a 1 year anniversary party, and they're involved. They're always there for me to call and stuff like that. But they also have a lot of influence, I'd say, in the valley. So I think that didn't hurt us. Also, like we brought on Nelson as a business partner, who's our chef here, does a lot of amazing stuff, and he's got a really strong following in the culinary community. So we really hit the ground running in a big way. So it was pretty mind blowing, man. Like we had lineups out the door the first probably 3 or 4 weeks that we opened. So it was pretty rad.
Run out of beer?
It was touch and go.
It was tight.
It was very touch and go. So
those were some quick turnarounds on those brewers, that's for sure. Maybe we could have used a bit more aging time, but do what you got to do.
All right.
So good.
So what's the plan for the future here? I mean, it's only the first birthday coming up, but what is beyond year one here?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say like the big thing for us is like Kelowna being a seasonal town. Like, everything's great in the summer and everyone's here, and it's everyone's frolicking around in the Okanagan sun and thirsty and excited, and it's really cool that we noticed that big downturn in September through to essentially February, but we hit packaged product on the beer side of things. But we made it through, we made it through. Things went well. We went fairly heavily into the packaging. Now we've had to retract that a little bit. So I guess our focus is keeping the quality of the beers is one thing, and then some slight expansion with the tanks. We've been doing some stuff with some other breweries in town here that might lead to something for us. But we'll just kind of like keep rounding ourselves out, and we're still working it out. I'm still.
But also, there's lots of development going on too in the neighborhood too. So I mean, like this could be a completely different vibe in a year or two, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The future is unwritten.
Yeah. So in terms of both of you move into Kelowna, what drew you to Kelowna besides beer? Like what do you enjoy doing here?
It's absolutely beautiful. Yeah. The weather to me was every time I came here, it was just hot as hell and dry, and it felt like paradise, and I didn't know weather could be this good in Canada. So that was the main driving factor, and it's scenic. It's absolutely beautiful. The people elect a decent government, and Ontario is just getting a bit more challenging to live there. It's just constantly in traffic, rat race kind of place, and so I was looking for a bit of a different vibe. And this town definitely has it, as does all of BC. So it's I don't know. I would recommend everyone to move here.
For me, to be honest, I came here in 2006 on a stop one on my world tour. So I ended up here. I was supposed to be here for 3 months, and I've ended up met my now wife, and I'm still on my way. Apparently, we might be doing a trip to Europe this year. Like, so I think, what is that, 13 years later? So.
You'll finish your long day.
It's like, slow steps, but yeah.
I mean, it'll be there.
Yeah.
And in terms of like tourist attractions and stuff for when people come to visit you, what else can they do in the local area here?
So first thing I usually do is I live across the street from Knox Mountain, so I usually take them on a hike up there, which is absolutely beautiful. You can see the whole town. Throw them in the lake afterwards, unless it's the wintertime.
That could still be fun.
Yeah, I really think that like a lot of people when I came here in 06, Kelowna was a different town for sure. It was probably still moving out of its like kind of more like a small town. It was sort of like coming of age, I would say. There was a lot of established wineries and stuff at that point, and it seems like the quality of the region has like definitely drawn a lot of good winemakers, cider makers. There's distilleries popping up. It seems like there's a tech division. It seems like there's a lot of like cool stuff going on here for people to move to. But besides that, I would say like, it's obviously the lake, the Big Whites up the road, Silver Star, multi-season sport places. So yeah, there's tons of stuff to do and lots of cool beer to drink in town. Yeah. There's lots of breweries popping up, man. So.
Seemingly a developing arts and music scene as well. The local bands are pretty fantastic. And there's also a lot of great local artists as well. I guess it's a little more affordable to live here than it is Vancouver. And might as well take advantage of that.
Yeah. And if somebody was wanting to go down the path of opening up a brewery with themselves, what would be some advice that you can give them?
Get a good group of people around you who are patient and can understand when you go over budget. Yeah, I would say the big thing is it's
money and patience.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, to me, I kind of enjoy that. Like, we've got a fairly large investor group, but it all comes from a place that we're all people from Kelowna. We knew what we could bring to the scene if we did it right, and we knuckled down and worked hard and got the right people on board. It probably doesn't make the greatest amount of dollar and cents, but if you want to do a cool project, I think bring a lot of cool people together who have the same vision and just have some patience, like, working with especially if you're going to do it in BC, like the governments, they've got a lot on their plate, man. So it's like, it is what it is. Try and time it out, in a place like Kelowna, it's seasonal. So everyone's antsy to get it done by summer, but you might not make that summer. Right. So it's like, I'd say try and get that financing. Get that financing in place, and just a good group of people around you who can kind of like understand. And then when you make a phone call to say, "Hey, man, like I got to get you down here to dig this ditch out. Those pipes actually going the wrong way." When we actually dug the floor up, and everyone is down here within 45 minutes, 5 shovels digging stuff out of the ground. It's pretty rad. So that would be my advice.
Make sure you hire someone who knows how to make beer. It's
fairly
amazing how, or like a winery, hire a good winemaker. Yeah. It's amazing how it seems to be an afterthought for a lot of these people.
What is it we do again? Yeah.
Coming from Ontario, it seems like there was a lot of vanity projects where people would just contract brew so they could try and go around and tell their friends that they own a brewery when they don't. And they would just, put out a lot of subpar product because I don't know if they ever were that interested in it. They just needed something for their egos. But thankfully, these people here love good beer and are capable of being very critical of it and are constantly trying to push it to be better rather than just, being like, oh, that's good enough. Let's just puke out that crap because it sells. It's not the attitude around here. They're constantly pushing me to try and make a better product.
Well, then what's the point, right?
And then, it's got to be a thing of passion and it's got to be real. Yep. Otherwise, you'll just be like all the other mediocre breweries out there.
Right. And then on that note, like, what would be some advice for somebody to make better beer?
First thing I would say is use real yeast strains. One of the biggest things that I've noticed a lot of breweries is that they haven't really ventured past like their homebrew setup. The guys in Guelph, Escarpment Labs, are a fantastic yeast company that we have now in Canada that they isolate and produce their own strains and their own blends. And having that ability to order fresh liquid yeast without it getting caught at customs is a huge game changer. I think as more brewers in this country start using their products and other people like them, you'll notice a significant improvement in beer quality across the board for sure. And then just spending money on actually having a good pH meter and a good crew of people so that people aren't getting burnt out because it's hard to make good beer when you're working too bloody much. Yep. And I've seen that happen to a lot of friends in this industry, and it really kicks the shit out of them. And you see what started off as a great brewery sometimes can fall apart after the third year because people have been working too much.
Right. Well, cool, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much, Ben. It was good to have you here, and please come back again soon.
Oh, I definitely will. Huge thank you to James and Matt. It was great hanging out with those guys. And actually, on my way, I was kind of doing a trip around the province at the time, and ended up spending an extra night in Kelowna on my way back home, and got to hang out with them again. And that was really, really nice getting to know those guys and hang out with them. And of course, drink their absolutely amazing beer. So can't wait to go back and check out them again next time I'm in Kelowna. If you enjoyed this episode, I sure hope that you're subscribed in your favorite podcast app and that you tell a friend, because it really helps support this podcast series. Big thanks again to the BC Ale Trail for making this episode possible. Visit them at bcaletrail.ca. If you want to follow this podcast series online through the social medias, you can by going to facebook.com/Cascadian Beer. I'm on Twitter at Cascadian Beer, and I'm also on Instagram at Cascadian Beer Podcast. You can also check out the website at cascadian.beer. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, remember, support your local.